see that happening for that reason alone. I think that there are some troubling things with the bullpen now that has been overworked, and we're heading into the dog days here. That's a bad sign. But yeah, I mean, we're not going to see the bottom fall out. I think they'll struggle. Though I think this is what we're going to get. I think we're going to get the rest. These last 50 games here are going to be basically what we've seen all along. They're going to hover around 500. They may get up above it for a game and then lose 3 in a row and be back down, and it just bounce around. So you're right, though. I mean, there is a decent core there. You need a rainmaker. Let's face it.
Yes.
That's what I think twisted that knife with the Tigers getting Price, is that they really didn't need one, and they got one. They already had rainmakers, particularly in their starting rotation already, but they have some in their lineup as well. I mean, this is a good team. They've been that kind of team for several years. They've actually shifted. They were a power team, and now they're obviously frontline starting pitching team. So, the Tigers, without even really trying in a sense, now just picked up another one of the top players in baseball, where the Indians it's been a good at least 7 or 8 years since you could even make a claim that they had one of the top 10 players in baseball. So that's the frustration. That's where the Indians are really not going to, they've sort of hit the glass ceiling. And last year, I think, was it. They overachieved it down the stretch there. And winning 20 or 25, winning 92 games, they overachieved. That team was really not a 92-win type of team. We're seeing it this year with more or less the same group of guys. So they can be a little better than they are now, but not a whole lot better. They're going to have to do something. Whether it's I don't know how you do it. That's the mystery.
I've got
it's
some
easy to say,
ideas.
just go out and get a free agent. Well, with what? The money's just not there. Let's keep in mind too that the Indians are dead last in attendance in all of baseball, not just the American League, all of baseball. They are dead last, and it's not even close. There's nobody close to them. They have last place all to themselves, 30 for 30. So, I mean, that's tough. How are you going to justify that? And perspective is that's why the attendance is low, is because this team is a tease, essentially. We had that nice finish last year. We thought they were ready to turn a corner. Wrong. No. And we've been here before. We've been teased by this team, and even throughout this season, they win 3 out of 4 in Detroit. Okay, here we go. This is it, turning point. And then they just blow it the rest of that trip, and now come home and lose 2 out of 3 to Seattle. So we have just been teased and jerked around by this team. But that being said, you're right. The bottom's not going to fall out. The team's not going to lose 90 games. They're going to hover around 78 to 80 probably when it's all said and done. But yeah, I mean, for those who are looking for a reason to just switch all attention to the Browns, there you go. I mean, the Indians serve it to you on a silver platter. Last year, at least at this time, there was that argument, well, they went on a little stretch there in July. They won 7 or 8 in a row and won a bunch of walk-offs all in a row. And you say, wait a minute, hang on, they're not done yet. And then, of course, they put September together. But this year, yeah, there's no resistance to the people who want to jump on that Browns bandwagon that's pulling out of the station. The Indians did nothing to keep them from doing that.
Well, I'm resisting it when I come out and mention that at a month later than today, 30 days later than today last year, they were further away from the playoffs than they are today. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not telling you to bank on September. I'm just saying, and I keep going back to the fact that in the first 2 months of the season, after 2 months, Tampa was bottoms down the worst team in the league, and if they keep going at the pace they're going, they'll end up one of the top teams in the league by the time this season is over. But I agree, it's apples and oranges. I know, I'm with you. For the most part, they are a up and down 500 team. Let me throw a couple of things at you, though. First off, for those of you that want to yell at the Tribe, do you know what the price for the Indians was for David Price? The Indians, to acquire David Price yesterday, the asking cost was Danny Salazar and Michael Brantley. So tell me.
No, you just don't do that. Yeah,
right.
I mean, that's. I'm glad you brought that up, because I know there are a lot of people today that have been asking that question. Like, well, geez, Detroit got him, and all they gave up was their one outfielder, basically, and then a couple prospects.
Yeah.
But but that's important to note. Like, are you really willing? Let's say they did that. Let's say they pulled that trigger, got rid of Salazar, got rid of Brantley. Okay, now you've got Price for basically the rest of this year.
You're worse
this
this
arbitration
year.
Next year. There's no way the Indians are keeping him long term. So what does it get you? I mean, the Indians are okay. That's great. And you have a former Cy Young Award winner, and maybe you sell a few more tickets, but are the Indians much more primed to contend? If anything, you make a move to keep Detroit from getting him, I guess, is the primary benefit there is that you get him so the Tigers don't. But yeah, the Indians would be no better a team if they made that deal. And in a year from now, they're worse because now they don't have Brantley and Salazar.
That's what I wanted to ask you, exactly what you just said, because I had this argument with people yesterday. Now, I get if you want to trade Salazar for Price and you get a year or two extension with them, you're trading the future for now. That's different. But to the people that made that argument, and Bruce is one of them, they're in the chat room right now. Let's just say that we have control. We just traded David Price to the Cleveland Heat. We've got him. Bring him in. We're sending you Salazar, and we're sending you Brantley. I would argue that the remainder of this season, the Indians are worse than keeping Michael Brantley and not getting David Price. I believe they win less games if you make that trade. So you're not trading for now. You're making a team worse. Worse now, worse next year, like what you said.
Yeah.
Because somebody says,
Brantley,
well, you can get...
Because of Brantley. If it were straight up Salazar, I'd say, yeah, go ahead, take that gamble. But particularly after just signing Brantley to a contract extension, we've got him for basically 3 more years at least.
Relatively cheap.
And then to trade him right away, and Brantley is much more of a proven commodity than Salazar is. Brantley has gotten gradually better each of the last 4 years. He's better this year than he ever has been. To get rid of him at this point, my God, he is unquestionably the best offensive player on this team right now. Probably the best offensive player this team has had in 3 or 4 years.
Agreed. And I still wouldn't want to move Santana either, but I would at least listen to your argument for Santana and Salazar for Price. But to me, Brantley, and even then, I still believe people are sleeping on Santana because of his batting average this season and not looking at the total body of work of what he does. I mean, but I'm not as quick as some people to part with Carlos Santana, but I would if it brought me the right piece, but not Brantley, because that's one of your engines. I believe, yes, of course, offense is easier to find than pitching, but he is not the run-of-the-mill outfielder that you're going to go out there and find. That's David Murphy. David Murphy is any outfielder that can hit 250 and win you a few games, but for the most part, he's just going to be up and down, and that's that kind of guy. So that argument to me says you're worse than you were for making the trade. So I'm just going to throw that out there. Tommy Malone, I actually heard from somebody in the Indians that they had a deal on the table for him, which was somebody we talked about from Oakland. I liked him, but I didn't look into his splits, apparently, and I've looked now. Much, much worse, like noticeably worse, away from Oakland's Coliseum when he plays in other places. Oakland is known as a place that has some funny statistical quirks, and guys are better there than when they go other places sometimes. So that was obviously the pause that the Indians had there. And plus, Oakland was so quick to move him, clearly, and they judge pitching pretty well. Clearly, they knew what they were doing. They dumped him off relatively quickly to Minnesota. But some people said, why didn't you go get Malone? And I liked him. I liked him because he was a young lefty with control. But they had some issues with that. That wasn't why. But I will tell you, you talked about how do you reconstruct this team. Just looking at the 2 moves that they made yesterday, and this is my gut, and hey, it's not even the offseason yet, so I could be crazy. But if I'm right, just remember that we had this conversation today. I think Ramsey is in your starting, or at least in the discussion in your outfield in spring training next year. I'm predicting now. I think the Indians move Michael Bourne in the offseason. I think they trade him and the 2 years left on his contract, and they may have to package some other stuff, but I think that they will move him out. I think that you will see them use that to try to bring in. They're obviously going to bring in a pitcher. And I'm not saying they're going to bring in a $25 million a year pitcher. Speaking of, Cliff Lee on the disabled list again, done for the season. Somebody argued with me yesterday that the Indians should have traded for Cliff Lee. I'm like, so basically you wanted to pay $25 million for less than what Justin Masterson's given you this year. You're mad enough that we're paying Masterson 10. You wanted to pay Cliff Lee 25. And the day after the trade deadline, he's toast and he's done for the season. I think Philly was just propping him back up out there to try to get somebody to take that contract from him. They knew what was about to happen with him. He's done. Yeah. And he may be done. But anyways, I think they go after a decently priced pitcher because I think they're going to reconfigure. They're not going to spend more money, but they're going to reconfigure how they spend it. Moving Bourne out clears up a decent chunk of money for a pitcher. I could see them getting a decently priced veteran pitcher along with Kluber to head up this starting rotation next year. And with Walters, I'm telling you, remember when they did the trade when they got Bauer, the 3-team deal? One of the things everybody gave the Indians kudos for was they were trying to trade Asdrubal, and they kind of found out what other teams needed as far as what prospects they were looking for at shortstop, and they were able to match up Arizona and Cincinnati and put that trade together. Walters, to me, and the fact that they paid to get him, because basically they sent Asdrubal and a check to pay Asdrubal for the rest of the season. Now, that tells me that they really like this kid, and I don't think it's for themselves because you got Lindor waiting on the hook.
Right.
I think it's because they've got a list of teams that there was a lot of talk about Asdrubal. At least 10 teams called him, and at least 4 or 5 were really serious. Those are all teams that in the offseason are going to be looking for a second baseman / shortstop, and they may have even given the Indians a list of prospects and said, hey, if you get this guy, or this guy, give us a call, we'll talk, and we'll work something out. So I could see him being a piece that they acquired, and they're going to flip that into something else in the offseason. That's just me looking at how this front office works, because you now have some true depth at shortstop prospects.
And keep in mind, too, that type of move that you just described is exactly how the Indians got Yan Gomes. If you remember a year ago or 2 years ago,
for Rogers.
I think it was Esmil Rogers, they traded for him, and were just, before we even had time to process who he was, within days, basically, he was traded in a completely separate trade. It wasn't a 3-way deal, was then traded away, and that's how the Indians wound up with Yan Gomes. They picked up something that they didn't need, that didn't really make sense at the time, and then a few weeks later, then they make another trade. Aha! Now this makes sense. So you're right. I can see both Walters and maybe even Ramsey potentially being packaged in some sort of deal with Bourne or whoever else in the off season to try and get more of that frontline type of player, whether it is a pitcher or a slugger, because God knows. And that's the one good thing about these two guys, is that they do have a little pop. There's a little bit of power there that is something that the Indians are sorely lacking. So if nothing else, even if they do wind up in the pipeline somewhere, that they did at least recognize, hey, if we're going to get somebody, let's get somebody who can put the ball over the fence, because goodness knows the Indians have struggled with that here these last 7 or 8 years.
And Ramsey, like I remind you again, first-round pick just 2 years ago, very good power-hitting prospect, number 6 in the whole St. Louis organization. JK, you know as well as I do, if there's an organization that you want to take a prospect from, it's St. Louis. I mean, St. Louis. I mean, you look at St. Louis, my goodness, if there is a franchise you want to model, I mean, maybe Tampa Bay up there, they've kind of hit the schneid a little bit here this year, but my goodness, St. Louis, just for the results and the consistency, I trust their judgment, man. If they pick somebody in the first round, I don't really even care whether or not he's lived up to expectations. If they pick somebody in the first round as recently as 2 years ago, I'm willing to take a look at that guy, because they don't miss much. And they were also, there's an argument to be made that the Indians maybe cashed out particularly on that deal, because the Cardinals were in a little bit of a spot. They needed starting pitching, and they got it. They not only with Masterson, but with the other trade they made with Boston, they put themselves in a very nice position, and they look good for right now. They look like geniuses for right now. But they clearly were willing to cough up maybe a little bit more than Masterson was worth. You're talking about a guy who, like you said, is on the DL, hasn't pitched a strike in over a month, and the Indians got basically a first-round draft pick 2 years ago. So this could potentially be like a Bauer type of trade. I mean, the Indians looked pretty smart after that one shook out. So it's completely possible that the Indians did get the better end of both deals. We'll have to see how they evolve and what happens from here. But I have no problem with the Indians, what the Indians did or what they got for what they got rid of, especially since we knew all along that both of those guys were not in their future plans. So we'll see. But I do not criticize them for that at all. No, and absolutely not. And like you said, just 2 years removed. I mean, he's not even – Walters at least had a bit of a shot, and if he would have hit this year, then Washington wouldn't have made the trade for Cabrera, but they needed somebody to fill that slot, so they were willing to trade him. He's at least somebody who you're hoping, but you're not sure if he's Matt Laporta or not, and if he's just good in AAA. The other guy, Ramsey, he's a legitimate true deal prospect. Like, he's legitimate. He's like Clint Frazier, just a couple of years removed from being number one pick. That's where he's at. So that one's a good one. Let me just ask you, and I don't know about this, but let me just ask you. Do you think that there's any concerns in this front office as far as job security this year? I'm not even going to chime in either way, but do you think they have anything to worry about?
In terms of upper front office, you're talking about, or
general management? That kind of
thing. I don't think so. I don't know that the expectations were that high going into this year that this
unfinished
is really
business
that far off. Well, yeah,